It's 8:45, so we're going to get started. I know there are still people who went out, but since we only have an hour, we're going to get started to give them a chance to make their presentation. Please join me in welcoming the Indigenous Design Studio of Brook, McIlroy, I believe it's pronounced. They will be talking to us about incorporating Indigenous values into physical office spaces. If you guys have any questions, they can't hear you unless you speak in the mic, okay? So just let me know and I will bring it over to you so they can hear your question. So over to you guys. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to pass it to Albert and then Danielle, and then I'll introduce myself last since I'm sharing the presentation.
Great, thank you, Ryan. Good morning, everybody. I think we'll do just a quick round of introductions to you all. I'm Albert Fillion. I'm a landscape architect in Thunder Bay, and really happy to meet everybody here, even though it's virtual for most, and happy to share some of our past work and experiences with all of you. So really excited to be here and being able to assist you with this session today. I'll hand it over to Danielle.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Danielle Desjarlais, and I am based in the Winnipeg office at Brook McIlroy. Currently, I'm an architectural intern at the firm, and I've been with the firm for 8+ years. And my community is Peguis First Nation, which is a community about 2 hours north of Winnipeg. And yeah, looking forward to presenting today. Thank you.
And bonjour, Gakanawea, Ryan Gori, Indigenous Animiki Wikwe Dongandoanji. So I'm from where you are situated, and I'm a member of Bingwe Niashe Anishinaabeg, which is Sandpoint First Nation on Lake Nipigon. And I'm coming to you from Treaty 1 today, and from our Winnipeg studio. I'm an architect and a member of the Indigenous Design Studio, and have been with Brook McIlroy for about 9 years, almost 10 years, and have worked on projects in and around Thunder Bay, Manitoba, Toronto area, so covering quite a broad range of areas. Today, I'm hoping that we can share some of our work, and while some of it may not be directed exactly at at office layouts, I think translating culture into design is kind of our specialty, and we work a lot with institutions, post-secondary, but also with First Nations directly in projects that they're looking to see through to fruition, such as governance centers, administration centers, etc. And so we're going to share some of our projects today. And yeah, we hope that you will be able to get the mic and have some questions for us. But maybe we can just give a brief introduction to the studio. So I'm going to share the screen. But I need to be enabled to share the screen. So I don't know if that's possible on your end.
I think it would probably have to be Paul just on his Zoom
Let
there.
me just go see if I can figure this out for you.
Or if you just make me the host, I think that might work also.
Participant who can be sharing like that. All right, give it a try, Ryan. I think it should work now.
That works. I think I'm gonna do this and see if that works.
Okay, we can see your screen.
Okay, trying to go a little bit full screen. Okay, great. Well, thanks again for having us. The Indigenous Design Studio at Brook McIlroy is really something that we formed out of, I guess, many years of collaboration. It's a practice area that we developed to really support communities, but also institutions and organizations who are looking to embed indigeneity as part of their process, as part of their spaces. And so, yeah, I mean, since Truth and Reconciliation in 2008, there's been many calls for the inclusion of Indigenous identity, Indigenous design, and Indigenous designers being called out in RFPs. So we're seeing a lot of uptake, but as you may know, there's not as much capacity in the industry. There's probably about 20 to 25 registered Indigenous architects in Canada. And by our kind of rudimentary calculations, it should be closer to 300. And you'll see similarly across New Zealand. United States statistics are even worse because of their higher population. So that just means there's much more room to grow. And it's really an exciting field that we're really engaged in. And there is no preconceived notions of what Indigenous design could be, but there are some indicators, and those indicators come from our cultural connections as well as our connections to the land. So you see 7 faces in front of you. So the Indigenous Design Studio has seen probably about 20 to 25 Indigenous interns come and go. Currently, this is our contingent of Indigenous staff. There's 7 of us, and we are represented in architecture, landscape architecture, planning, interior design, and a mixture. Some people are actually dually architects or architectural interns and planners. So quite a broad range. It's split. It's split amongst, there's 3 Indigenous Indigenous designers in the Winnipeg studio, 3 in Toronto, and then 1 who started in Thunder Bay most recently. So we're going to take you through a series of projects, and hopefully it'll help to kind of provoke some of the thoughts around what you're trying to embed in maybe some of the spaces and for some of the clients that you work with. This is a project that we completed in 2022. It's the CIBC Legacy Room. And so we worked with the Downey Wenjack Fund on bringing a kind of dense Indigenous design to a specific space within the office towers that were being constructed. And this space was meant to foster a sense of education, foster a sense of gathering, and provide a safe space where people can come together, not only as staff, but also as visitors to the space. Some of the important elements as we worked with their Indigenous design committee within CIBC were to provide a table that was modular, something that could be moved around in case they wanted to have a session that was not related to a table in a space that they could gather in a circle, let's say. The use of wood was really important, as well as in discussions with that group, creating a space that was unique in the sense that it started to break down some of the boxy and rectilinear spaces that we're so used to being meeting rooms, like the room that I'm in, like the room that you're in, and create this sense of enclosure that was warm, that had a relationship to natural materials like wood, and also to kind of feel like it's giving you a bit of a hug as you enter. The space is loosely based on the concept of the lodge, and each of these light openings in the ceiling are related to, there's 3 of them, and that's representing the 3 larger nations within the Toronto area, but also the 3 fires of the Anishinaabe. Some of the more detailed features of the space, if you look at the top left, there's this kind of stone wall. So we sourced that stone material from an Indigenous quarry on Manitoulin Island called Odawa Stone. So it's a limestone, and it's a polished limestone. And the stools that you see in the back on the bottom left image, those are sourced from Indigo Arrows, which is also an Indigenous-owned interiors business. And so in projects, we always look to try and source from Indigenous suppliers where possible. We also do a lot of graphic work, and we might show you some of that as part of this presentation. But on the glass graphics, there's a representation of the original signatories of the treaty. And so we met with at the time, chief of the Mississaugas of the Credit, and kind of asked if he would be comfortable in sharing that imagery. So it's talking about, not only our relationship to the land in those diagrams, but also our relations, our treaty relations, and the importance of that. One of my first projects when I joined Brook McIlroy was at Algonquin College, and we were responsible as part of a larger design team for bringing Indigenous presence to a student commons, to an outdoor space, which we won't go into in this presentation, and to the broader library, and seeing how we can facilitate some semblance of Indigenous art, Indigenous space, and working with communities like Kitigan ZB in Quebec and Pikwakanagan First Nation in Ontario. So, going to community, listening to some of their desires, and then, really creating a flexible space. So you can see this circular room that's within a broader kind of student commons. It's closable. It's multifunctional in terms it can be used for ceremony. So there's mechanical systems for smudging. In behind it, which is not shown, there's kind of like a little elders / visitors gathering space as a small kitchen, a small living room space, a fireplace, and a small meeting room. On the day-to-day, it's students are just flowing in and out. Tables are just set up and sprawled across the space. When it's it can have event mode, where there's chairs lined up for a speaker, etc. And Danielle, who's joining us today, was instrumental in pushing forward some of the graphics that we had kind of woven throughout the entire project. So you see a sample of that in the bottom middle section, and really looking at ideas like the wampum, the clan system, the Seven Fires prophecy, and we're embedding this symbology throughout the entire library. And you can also see some of the language was brought in. So these spaces were named, and they had, in some cases, the lettering and the naming was prominently shown in some of the spaces. And then lastly, on the right-hand side, we traveled with a couple of artists to gather information about what a mural depiction might look like. So, a lot of this symbolism came from the community, the sky realm, the water realm, the earthly realm, Turtle Island, the ideas of our architectures that were pre-colonial. And then the moose was really prominent because, like in the plains here, provided everything from clothing to, food, shelter, tools, all of that, like the buffalo does here. And then obviously the representations of the plant world, the medicine world. So at the University of Toronto, this is a much smaller renovation, the Waukegan S. Bryce Institute for Indigenous Health. So you can see some of the elements we're bringing in across our projects are similar. Again, these drum stools that we like so much to use in our projects formed kind of this flexible arrangement. They could be chairs, they could be tables. The wood elements were really important to this group, as well as bringing a sense of art and patterning into the glass. We need some privacy screening on the glass, so why not make it intentional and have a pattern that's designed? The artwork is, I believe, Roy Thomas, and getting permission from Louise in Thunder Bay to have some of his art depicted and blown up to a much larger scale, so to kind of have a much broader influence on the space. So this one was really, and then bringing a live edge wood table into some of these spaces. So, many considerations are budgetary, but I think the arrangement of space and the flexibility, allowing different arrangements, is really key. As well as, the way we situate ourselves in relation to our clients is really important. Sitting among as opposed to sitting in opposition to. So I think the way that we present spaces is really important, the way that we organize. People have indications of where to go when, chairs are in a certain way. But I think it's really important to reflect on, not everyone is on their same, cultural journey. Everyone has different belief systems. So it's really hard to paint a singular picture of, what a space could be. And, it's really knowing who your clients are and kind of doing your best to incorporate the values that, they see. And much of our work really starts with the land, because the land is common to all of us. And if we can draw on elements specific to the landscapes and land elements, of the regions in which we work, I think it's a really good start in thinking about, how we bring that into spaces, as well as naturalizing spaces, because, drywall and synthetic materials are important for certain aspects, but can we bring a sense of, bringing wood, plant materials, things like that into spaces, natural metals, natural stones, etc. So yeah, you're going to see those kinds of elements as common themes within our work. This is one that we've done recently at the University of Waterloo Indigenous Relations Office. And the palette was something, the color palette was something that we worked closely with the client on. They didn't want to have just, black, white, gray. They wanted to have some punches of color here and there. And as well bringing that biophilic material like wood into spaces. So, your first impression of the space is this kind of, wood wrapped desk, ceiling, wall, floor, and it's kind of this, you're entering into this space that's, from the outside, which is a drywalled, corridor, into this kind of really warm welcome space, and that wood finds its way throughout the space. Simple things that we did were creating like a circular space in the central gathering area, so you get a little sense of that in the bottom right hand corner. Some circular tables that were in clusters for day-to-day use, but also for gathering. They could be moved off. There was a circular carpet within the space. It didn't have any iconography. It was just simply a circle, and it was a way to kind of emphasize that way of gathering and that way of sharing. At Humber College, it was kind of more on the artistic side, looking at public art pieces throughout. So these buildings were already built, these spaces were already made, or they were under construction. And so on the left-hand side, in working with the elders there, we were looking at how we could bring the clan system into kind of full view, and to educate people not only about language, but also about the clan system generally, is how we operated as Anishinaabe prior to contact. It's how some of us still operate today, and our relationships are built on the clan and our responsibilities within that clan, but also our responsibilities to others. And that's what this graphic kind of represents, is that each clan is connected and has a counterpoint within the system. The language, is always best spoken rather than read, but there's some limitations there. And you'll see the iconography that we adapted on the glass graphics found its way onto this art piece that you also see on the right hand side. So symbols representing the clans, shelter, food, the wild rice, and there's some other symbols related to technology, like the birch bark canoe, things that we want to bring to the forefront in relation to our conversations with the elders. Maybe I'll pass it to Danielle to just talk about. So these are, the ones that we've shown are kind of completed works. These are some projects that we're working on.
Thanks, Ryan. So this is a building that's a Center for First Nation Administration and Leadership. So it's about a 21,000 square foot building, so quite a large building, and it's 2 stories. And it contains spaces like offices, meeting rooms, kitchen, staff room, and it hosts different departments and chief and council for the community. And And it also has enhanced staff areas, including this space shown here, which is the cultural room. And again, we're trying to include the warmth and sense of natural materials into the space. So we've done that through wood, and the flooring here is indigo arrows, again, like the stools we spoke about earlier. So we think it's important to reference these cultural connections through the materiality, like wood, patterns, and just warm tones of color. And we draw our interior palette, including color and materials, from the inspiration of the surrounding flora and landscape of the community. So referencing where the building is located and who it represents, leading it to a connection of place and locality. And again, this room is equipped with like the proper mechanical equipment to provide smudging, a space for smudging, and a space for cultural practices.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to touch on is, many of the renovations that we do to modern buildings or buildings that exist, I should say, are, they can be quite expensive when they're embedding a smudge-friendly system. In nations, it maybe is not as much a concern around, smudging occurs maybe throughout the building on an infrequent basis, but then having a dedicated space that's smaller where the systems are also smaller and can be manageable. So.
And this is a space for Indigenous students for a post-secondary institution. So it's a student hub that reflects the institution's Indigenous values, and it's meant to be a space that's welcoming to everybody. For this project, for every project, it's important that we meet with the client and community for design workshops and input from them to identify the needs and program and intention of the spaces. So this space really reflects that and reflects the sense that we were reinventing existing student space already into a multi-use space that reflects the local context of the different populations at this institution. So this space includes zones like administration and student spaces and gathering spaces. So it was really important for us to identify and create a sense of appropriate privacy, but also collaboration spaces. So finding that balance between gathering and the necessary privacy for staff and other visitors. And it's important, or it was important for this client to include elders in the space. So the space has offices for the elders and offices for staff and quiet spaces for students. So in this space showing here in particular, it's the entry zone. So it's meant to be really welcoming to visitors. Again, we're showing those stools by indigo arrows. And we provided this wall, this gallery wall, where you could curate different artwork that the client currently already has, or even showing student work or other artists' work. And we're showing that patterning on the glazing on the left as well. I don't know if Ryan has anything to add here.
Yeah, I think it's really rewarding and exciting to meet with the staff and the students in particular, not just on this project, but on many projects. People are so used to having the minimum, and for them to dream into spaces and to have something that's was situated beyond what they're even thinking is really like, no, you deserve this space. You deserve to have a nice space to be in that reflects who you are, and has the flexibility not only for gatherings or arrangements, but also for the future, make space for future considerations. And, you know, some other aspects of projects that, you know, we've been able to work on relate to, you know, the sharing of medicines. And I know that some of those images were shared with us as well. But not everyone practices medicine, you know, utilizing medicines in the same way. And so I think it's definitely a delicate balance in terms of how much you show, you know, but really if it comes from your clients, then that's definitely a better way than, you know, making assumptions about what they might be interested in. So, and, you know, that process can be longer, right? Because you're building those relationships and, you know, as I mentioned, some of the key elements are, you know, talking about the land and territory in which you're working, being respectful of, you know, nations and treaty relations, and how do you show that? You know, how do you show your commitment to, you know, making good relations and being in good relation? And that's, you know, that's really ultimately what it's about is having a good relationship, or, you know, building one. So many of these spaces kind of reflect the desires of the clients, and then leave room for, you know, as things change, as things evolve, you know, and in many of the spaces, they're welcoming others who are not, you know, let's say culturally connected. So it's a way for them to showcase who they are, as well as to bring people into the fold in the sense of understanding and educating others. And, you know, I think going the extra distance to respect that treaty relationship, and, you know, those host nations that really are, you know, the original caretakers of the land. So yeah, I think language is, I mean, I'm super interested in language. So bringing language into spaces. I think as an architect, it's really humbling to work with, you know, in our language, there is no word for architect, there never was. You know, that skill, that understanding was dispersed amongst the people. I imagine it would be similar for, you know, lawyers and those working in the legal system. You know, so right off the bat, there's a sense of humility in the work that we do. So now, how much time do we have? We're here till, I want to leave room for questions for sure.
Until 9:45.
Okay. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to switch just to some of the patterning work and I've described some of it already, so I'll skip through it quicker. Just give me a second here. Just to give you a bit more depth of some of the patterning work. So this was the Humbercology, if you remember, and this shows a bit more of the detail. These are cultural markers, the ones on the right, as well as the kind of half shell shelter that we've designed. It was kind of an interesting, experience because we were speaking with elders about traditional structures like the sweat lodge, and we're building a structure out of steel. So it's kind of this interesting juxtaposition. We're not building a steel sweat lodge, but what we're doing is we're creating a sense of orientation and spatial connection. So while this is a kind of half shell lodge, it has an orientation related to the east, which is the doorway in which the elders shared with us that you enter into. It references technologies like reed mat and cattail mat weaving as its covering. But it has this kind of unique form, and it references the overlaps of these panels, but in a more exaggerated way. And then the cultural markers also, they have language embedded on them, which I don't think you see in this image, but the patterns are unique to these stopping places that we designed. So it's kind of a micro version of the carrying place trail, and each carrying place point on the carrying place trail had a different pattern associated with it. So it's the trail between Lake Ontario and Lake Simcoe. So the elders said, well, you need to emphasize wild rice, for example, or you need to emphasize the fishing weirs. So this was just some patterning related to that. Also at Humber, some of the symbology, so we kind of went to the Welcome Center. We had to look around. Originally, they had this kind of straight sidewalk coming out. And so we saw it as an opportunity to kind of disrupt that really rectilinear approach. And this kind of sky view depicts the migration story. So Anishinaabeg, we came from the east. Originally, we made our way through prophecy and direction to where we are located now. And that's why we are represented all across, almost all across Canada and into the United States because of this journey. And so these stopping points on that journey, and the story is fairly well known through the Mishomis book and other sources and different tellings. But the elders kind of instruct us, okay, let's start with some of the clans and symbols that are in the Toronto region. So in the bottom middle, there's the Caribou clan. There's an image on the left, just left of there, of the Migish shell, which is part of the story. And then to the right of that, some of the canoes. So talking about that migration and how we made our way. And then a detail, each one of these bronze discs have some of the stopping point geographies on them, or where it's suspected that the stopping points were. So like around Montreal, for example, is one of them. And then we did some coloration to kind of emphasize that journey. I talked about this, but this just gives you a sense. We depicted not only the clans on the glass, but on the other side, which is not photographed as well. Well, I guess it's kind of in the middle here. We depicted that migration story on a smaller scale, so people could get a sense of it on the glass, like as a kind of a key map or a mini map, so that they knew what they were walking through as they made their way. So this is the whole graphic that is on that pathway, the one you see at the bottom. In Collingwood, Ontario, we had a different approach to patterning. We were looking at the land and working with an elder who challenged us to look at the food forest, everything from the ground all the way up to the tree canopy and everything in between. So you see the different species that we were looking at in terms of and patterning, and then relating those back to the 7 teachings. So there was a kind of these 7 panels above you that related not only to those plant patterns, but also to the 7 teachings, as I mentioned. And as we know, there's way more than 7 teachings, but those are 7 foundational teachings. And then back to Algonquin College, a little bit more detail on the patterns that we developed. So this bottom pattern panel is the 7 fires. I think there's only 6 depicted here, but it goes on. And kind of weaving these fires into not only those depictions, but also we had some clan animals that were part of this patterning as well, kind of like little Easter eggs, so to speak, within the patterning. And that was on another panel. And then you see some of this patterning show up on the steel outside the building. This was relating to the canoe symbology again, and ways of movement. This is a much larger scale patterning work that we're doing at Jim Tovey Lakeview Conservation Area. So this is down in Mississauga. But, bringing this kind of idea of movement throughout these panels. And then, there's some actual depictions of plants and animals as part of it, but with the same style of perforation in those panels. This is a more recent patterning work. This was developed by Courtney, who's one of our studio members. She worked with Rouge Park down in near Scarborough to develop this beading pattern. And so this is forming part of their identity piece, their wayfinding, and you'll kind of find it throughout Rouge Park on different markers, signage, etc. So in this case, really looking at the mixture of the agricultural history and the Indigenous history, and sort of weaving those together. And then lastly, some conceptual work we've done for a project in Thunder Bay, just looking at how we can bring that kind of beadwork patterning in a larger scale, in reference to spatial arrangement. It kind of leads you through the space, and then you find yourself as part of the kind of larger gathering space beyond. So this just shows a a really early concept rendering. Anyways, I feel like I've been talking forever, so I think I'm gonna pause there and we can take any questions that you might have. Hopefully we answered some of what you were looking for, but certainly happy to share some more.
Anybody has any questions? I do have a question for you, Ryan, or really anyone else who's on that call. So as legal clinics, the majority of us, we're renting our space. We don't own it. And we also have limited resources, right? And what would be your key tips for making our space welcoming and incorporating Indigenous values in a way that if we needed to move space, we could kind of pick up and recreate that space in a different place? Because I saw there's a lot of murals and a lot of design like in windows, and it's all very beautiful. But I like if you need to move space, you can't bring the whole wall with you, right? Would you have any kind of key tips for that?
Yeah, that's a good that's a good provocation. I mean, I think it's obviously it's the kind of, I don't want to say it in this way, but cheap and cheerful way of doing things, on a budget, but also, meaningful. You're obviously you're procuring artwork from your clients. That's one way that I've seen, right? And creating, I guess, non-fixed furnishings that you can bring with you. And some of the carpets that we're showing could be adapted in terms of being area carpets as opposed to fixed carpets. So I think there's a way to do that. And I've seen some of that as well. I think, in other cases, if you are engaging in the land, let's say, working with land-based medicines, things like that, or you're offering, a tea cabinet is something that I've seen as part of spaces too, where you're actually able to use some of those teas if you know how to work with those. Much of our medicines is in tea or in chewing medicines. But obviously, if you're comfortable in sharing that knowledge, or has been shared with you by clients, I think having those elements present, and that's just maybe either on a counter or in a glass cabinet, something simple. Trying to think of what else you could do that's adaptable. I mean, it makes me think of historically how we move through space, especially in Anishinaabeg territory. We didn't have a lot of fixed things either, right? We moved seasonally, and some people still move seasonally to where the fishing is, where the hunting is, etc. Right? So we bring pieces of it with us. So maybe that's the kind of mentality that you need to have, right, when you're procuring pieces.
I think, Ryan, you can also look at opportunities in drapery that you can move, lamp kind of lighting covers and shades that you can add, and you can take those with you. Anything that's really movable in terms of shelving to help with that flexibility of space and the use of wood within shelving, and like bookcases and things that you can remove is a good opportunity to bring in those biophilic elements like wood and texture and patterning, and you can do that patterning on like the face of the bookshelf, and that's something that you can kind of take with you, so you can still have that opportunity to do that beautiful patterning that's meaningful.
Yeah, and I feel like you can do a lot with furniture arrangements. And maybe you're already doing that in the photos you shared with us, but I think you can create different zones and spaces within your space to design as you need. So you can make a circle space out of chairs or couches, and just arranging them as you need and taking them with you when you move.
Yeah, and I mean the graphics that we're showing on glazing are not super expensive. They're vinyl, so they can be removed. But what it does is it presents really well, right? Because it's like it's this kind of overall first impression of the space, and it does have a really interesting effect on the space too. So yeah, any vinyl sign companies can usually create those kinds of glazing. We did it for our office here in Winnipeg. We did probably, I think we did about 3 panels that were about 3 feet wide each, and then our patterning is about 5 feet tall. And that work was probably, $1,000 to $1,500 or something like that installed. So it wasn't, overly pricey. The work that we did at Algonquin, however, that is ceramic baked on the glass, and that's more like $40,000. So, whatever, you can do it in different ways. But similarly with wall graphics, you can do wall graphics in vinyl as well. And, although it seems permanent, it can be removed. Let's say if you move spaces, it doesn't come with you, unfortunately, but it also is an inexpensive way to have a larger impact, to have a larger graphic as part of your wall space.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I didn't know you could do a vinyl wall graphic, so thank you for sharing that. There's another question here.
Thank you very much. That was a fantastic presentation. I was keen to understand 2 things, one of which, leading from the previous comment, was who could we ask to do that work so that it's appropriately assigned? I think that's really important. And I'm part of a legal clinic that's based in Toronto with 9 specialty clinics. So we have shared space. And I was keen to understand, I think I heard part of the conversation that might help, is to make our meeting rooms more inviting and more to align with the principles and the designs that you were describing. But again, with other clinics, we have very limited resources. How could we do that, and who could guide us to do that?
Yeah, for sure. To answer your first question, I mean, yeah, looking to local, there's so many local Indigenous artists, Toronto and Thunder Bay, who can do that work. I think graphically, there's arts organizations too. I think the Indigenous Curatorial Collective has an arts list. The city of Toronto may have an arts list as well for artists, let's say. And, I'd say it's pretty accessible work for many artists, because a lot of it is graphic, and many artists are working graphically and digitally, I should say. Yeah, in terms of spatial arrangement, in shared space, I think it's, one, to get people on board with the idea of bringing a sense of Indigenous content to spaces. I feel like it's a no-brainer, but maybe I'm biased the territories that we work in are firmly rooted on Indigenous land. And so we're working from that basis. So I think it's an easy story to tell in terms of why we should do it. And, there are, firms like ours who do, smaller renovations. There are other firms, Indigenous architects in Toronto region as well, who could do that kind of renovation. They're interior designers. There are a few, but that can easily do that work. And, oftentimes it's, you're looking for a concept, an idea. You could be paying anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000, depending on what you're asking for and who you're hiring. It's much like when you pay artists as well. Like it's hard to. You have to kind of value their work and input. So there are a few firms that can serve you. I mean, in Toronto, I can think of, there's probably 3 practices that are Indigenous led that I can think of. But you can also engage directly with an artist, and some of them may have some ideas about the space as well. I guess you have to look at your budget, first of all.
Thank you. Do we have more questions? We have another question, Ryan.
Thanks, Maggie. Just a comment. I was very skeptical coming here this morning because we had the legal needs assessment that had a lot of comments and feedback in it about our spaces. And I really struggled with the ideas of how can we incorporate that feedback into our spaces while keeping also keeping in mind the needs and safety of caseworkers. And I have to say, I really appreciate your session. Some really great ideas. Wish I wasn't retired because I'd be going back and making some changes to our waiting spaces. So it was really practical, and I thank you for that.
Thank you. That's good. We were also skeptical that we were, meeting your needs potentially, but I think, yeah, it's many of these things can be applied at different scales. I think that's one of the things that we can communicate. They don't always have to be big grand rooms that are, made out of wood, because we're not CIBC. We don't have that kind of money.
Yeah. Wish we did have that kind of money though, because it was really beautiful.
Yeah, but you can even do, you can do simple things with wood, like woodworking in general too. To hire someone to do a solid wood table, or even a plywood table, even plywood, even though it's not solid wood, it still has a presence, it still has a power to it. It still has the intent of the natural materials, the look, some of the feel. So it can be done in a more economical way. I'm coming fresh off of just building a plywood table for our dining room, so that's why it's yeah, fresh in my mind.
All right. Do we have more questions for our friend here? It doesn't look like there's more question, Ryan, and you still have 15 minutes if there's anything else you guys want to talk about, or
Oh, everyone's
if not, it's okay too. I don't want to pressure you.
captive
I'm just
audience.
saying.
All right, here we go. No, just kidding. Yeah, I think it's we've been doing this for a number of years, and there are clients who I feel like get it right in the sense of understanding relationships and understanding how to hand over agency to not only designers but also to their clients, like their Indigenous clients. And we've seen projects be really successful where there's the understanding on all sides, and trusting in the process, related to how we like to ideate, form space, how time can be a bit of a constraint, when we're working on an architectural project, but really speaking to that one elder who doesn't use email and you have to go talk to, and bring something physically to them, can make all the difference in a project. And I think, like I had mentioned off the top, everything is about relationships, whether it's with people or whether you're building a relationship with a medicine, or finding ways to understand. So I maybe I'm preaching to the choir and that you already know these things, but I think it's really important to reemphasize, at least on in my experience. And I'm going to hand it to Danielle, and then Albert, if you have any other comments that you'd like to make from your own personal experience.
Yeah, I just think that a project for me is so much more meaningful and important when clients and Indigenous communities are involved in the whole process. And me personally, every time I work on a project like that, I learn so much from the people that are a part of it. So I think that is the most important thing in a project. Not so much the outcome, it's still important, but just building those relationships and being a part of that process and that side of things. So yeah, that's all I have to say. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Danielle. I think I'd like to maybe add a little bit from a landscape architectural perspective, where you don't just suddenly arrive in the office space, and it's also a journey to get there, and your experience from the office space is always first the outside and how you get to these spaces, and how people perceive their experience of coming to a space. Is, you know, the arrival experience also something that is inviting and warm, given, you know, some situations, considering that you guys do provide, you know, legal counsel, are people comfortable in their arrival to a space where you have a beautiful, maybe something like you said, if you're moving, you have a beautiful entrance sculpture, something that kind of shows you as a landmark, or a place of help or assistance from the street where people can see you visibly. And it could be an art piece that you can take with you when you move to a different space, and also some signage that is developed with artists and architects on the side of a building that can come with you, and it may be a larger mural or anything like that, but also creating an outdoor space where people can wait before they go in, or maybe they're waiting for a partner or you know, a spouse before they go into the clinic, or into the legal clinic for counsel, and having a space where people can sit outside and wait, and also translating, like Ryan had mentioned, that biophilic element and the smell of and textures that can be brought through, and the use of you know, a birch tree in the front of the building that brings beautiful color in the spring and summer, but in the winter the texture of the bark is something that can be related to as well. And even in thinking of that seasonality of your arrival experience, using some dogwoods with the red sticks coming through the snow. So I think that there's a lot that can be translated from the inside to the outside, and vice versa, to really enhance the experience of the clientele that do come to the space. I think that arrival sequence is key, and making sure that your initial perception of the space is introduced in an inviting way through the landscape and texture and patterning. I think that's essential.
You remind me of something, Albert. You know, oftentimes having a little takeaway item, like you know, a medicine or something that people could take with them. You know, Albert mentioned dogwood. You know, it's very, you know, prevalent across all, you know, many parts of Canada. We use it specifically as a tobacco and a medicine. Some people use it as a medicine for arthritis. So maybe that's very specific, but having something, you know, maybe people could take away if they, let's say they don't have medicine in their lives, but that they could take with them little pieces of that, I think is, you know, really a nice touch too. A little basket with some medicines in it.
All right. So unless there's, you guys are done with your presentation, I believe.
We are done.
Okay, perfect. So unless we have some last questions for them, I just want to thank you guys so much for being here and giving us this presentation. It's been a pleasure having you here, and you gave us some valuable tips and a lot to think about when we go back to our office spaces. So again, thank you so much for taking some of your time to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Enjoy the rest of your conference.
Bye. I hope you guys have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.